My name is Margaret Hale. I am 68 years old, a retired nurse who knows the rhythm of a pulse and the weight of a promise. On the night, everything broke. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was rinsing a teacup, listening to the hum of my old refrigerator, and checking the new security app the technician had finally fixed that afternoon. I never mentioned it to my son. I meant to, and then I didn't. Habit, forgetfulness, call it what you will. I tapped the icon and waited for the feed to load, expecting nothing but the blue-gray quiet of my living room. The image bloomed into focus, clearer than the memories I carry of night shifts and soft baby breaths. Daniel stood by my desk, the one with the shallow drawer where I keep my passport and the deed. His shoulders were tense, his hand moving through papers he had no reason to touch. Claire hovered beside him, neat, as always, a pen tucked behind her ear like a promise she hadn't made. The microphone caught her voice the way hospital walls catch a whisper. "If she doesn't sign, we'll just forge it," she said, as if reading a grocery list. I didn't breathe. The teacup knocked against the sink and rang like a tiny bell. I watched my son, the boy whose fever I'd cooled with damp cloths, whose lunch money I counted when mine ran low, gnawed once, curt and practical. He looked down at the deed to my house as if it belonged to him already. Heat rose to my face, and I tasted metal. I gripped the counter with wet hands and stared at my phone, at the life I knew unspooling into something meaner and smaller. I wanted to storm down the hall, to tear the papers from his fingers, to demand the version of Daniel I thought I'd raised. Instead, I held still, the way I used to steady my hands before inserting an IV. Stillness first, then action. In the glow of that small screen, betrayal took a shape I could name, and fear learned to make room for resolve. I stood rooted in my kitchen, the phone glowing in my hand, replaying that dreadful moment again and again. My pulse hammered so loudly that it drowned out the ordinary sounds of the house, the soft ticking of the wall clock, the faint creak of the pipes, even the murmur of voices on the screen. I forced myself to breathe like I'd taught patience so many times, slow, measured, deliberate, but the breaths came shallow, tight with disbelief. The first thing I did was save the recording. My fingers moved with the precision of muscle memory, as if documenting evidence were no different than charting a patient's vitals. I copied the clip to a hidden folder, emailed a copy to myself, and wrote down the time on a scrap of paper. My hands shook so badly the ink bled into a jagged line. Still, I did it, because if I hesitated, I feared it might vanish, as though the proof could dissolve with my nerve. When I finally lowered the phone, I leaned hard against the counter. The kitchen smelled faintly of chamomile, but it comforted me no more than a stranger's perfume. My son, my Daniel, had stood in my living room and agreed to forge my name. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if that could quiet the storm beating inside. The boy I had rocked to sleep, the young man I had cheered for at graduation, the one I thought would sit by my bedside when my time came, he was planning to erase me. I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Claire had been joking in poor taste. Maybe Daniel's nod had meant nothing more than weariness. I played the clip again, hungry for ambiguity, but the words struck with surgical clarity. If she doesn't sign, we'll just forge it. There was no kindness hidden in that tone, no misunderstanding in the sharp edge of her voice. Hours slipped past in a haze. I paced the hallway, then sat in the dark of my bedroom, then stood again because stillness felt unbearable. My mind swung between grief and anger, between wanting to weep and wanting to scream. Every memory I held of Daniel seemed to twist, the child's hand clinging to mine when we crossed the street, the teenager shrugging into a jacket before his first job interview, The man standing tall with his new bride on the church steps. Those images, once bright, now felt contaminated, infected by the shadow of what I had seen. When I heard their footsteps on the stairs later that night, I hurried beneath the covers and stilled my breathing. They passed my door, their muffled conversation drifting like smoke I couldn't grasp. I caught fragments, Claire's laughter, Daniel's low replies, and I shivered. Had they always sounded like that? Or was I only hearing malice now because I knew what to listen for? Morning came with no relief. At breakfast, Daniel poured me coffee, his smile as easy as ever. "Sleep all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Practiced?" I studied him across the table, searching for guilt in the curve of his mouth or the flicker of his eyes. For an instant, I almost convinced myself it had all been some cruel misunderstanding. But then Claire reached across, her manicured fingers brushing the phone beside my plate, sliding it closer to herself with a too-smooth motion. She laughed lightly at something Daniel said, but her glance at the device was sharp, assessing. I sipped my coffee, bitter on my tongue, and forced my lips into something that resembled a smile. Inside, my resolve hardened. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. Yet already a whisper crept into my thoughts, warning me that they would try to make me question it. The battle, I realized, hadn't ended with the recording. It had only begun, that evening, when the house settled into its usual quiet. I opened the app again. My hand trembled slightly as I tapped the icon, bracing myself for whatever I might find. But instead of the familiar view of my living room, the screen blinked red. Connection error. I tried again. Same message. A third time. Still nothing. My throat tightened. The camera had been working. I had seen it with my own eyes. I climbed onto a chair and checked the small black lens tucked into the corner of the ceiling. The power light was dark. The wires had been carefully pulled free. Someone had disabled it, and it wasn't the technician. "Mom?" Daniel's voice startled me. I spun around, nearly losing my balance. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, his expression calm, almost too calm. "What are you doing up there?" "The camera," I said quickly, pointing at the darkened lens. "It was working yesterday. Now it's not." He walked toward me, his eyes steady in a way that made me uneasy. "That thing hasn't worked in weeks. Didn't you say you were still waiting for the repair guy?" The words hit me like cold water. Had I? I remembered complaining about the delay. I remembered the technician coming back, the relief when it was finally restored, but doubt coiled in my chest. Claire appeared at his side, her tone sweet as honey. "Margaret, maybe you're just overtired. Stress can play tricks on the memory. You've been through a lot lately." She stepped forward, her hand brushing my arm with practiced gentleness. "You should rest. Leave the paperwork and the house stuff to us." Her voice sounded sympathetic, but her eyes were sharp. I felt them probing, searching for weakness, forgetful. That word echoed louder than it should have. What if they were right? What if I had imagined the recording? I climbed down from the chair and retreated to my bedroom, closing the door firmly. My heart pounded as I unlocked my phone and opened the file manager. The folder where I had saved the recording was gone. I checked again, swiping through every directory, empty. My skin prickled. I opened my email, certain I had sent myself a copy, but the inbox showed nothing. No file, no trace. Panic clawed at me. I hadn't deleted it, which meant someone else had. The realization chilled me. They had been inside my phone. If they could erase that, they could erase anything. At dinner, I barely touched my food. Daniel noticed. "You seem distracted." "Mom?" Everything okay?" His tone was concerned, almost tender. He reached across the table, laying a notepad next to my plate. "Here, maybe jot things down so you don't worry. Sometimes memory slips are nothing to be ashamed of." Claire nodded, her smile bright. "Exactly. Lots of people your age use reminders. It's normal." The words sank like stones. I wanted to shout that I wasn't confused, that I knew exactly what I had seen and heard, but their eyes watched me like hawks, calm and patronizing, as if daring me to argue. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the notepad they'd given me. I pressed my pen to the page and forced myself to write one sentence in shaky letters. Find proof. Find the truth. Because if I didn't anchor myself to that, if I let their voices seep in any further, soon I might believe them. And then they wouldn't need to steal my home. I would hand it to them myself, convinced I had simply forgotten the difference between love and betrayal. The notepad lay on my nightstand like a lifeline. Every morning I forced myself to glance at the words I had written. Find proof. Find the truth. It was the only way to steady myself against the drip of doubt Daniel and Claire poured into me. Yet doubt is a sly intruder. It creeps in even when the door's bolted. One afternoon, I decided I needed something irrefutable, something beyond my memory. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Ramirez, the physician who had been my doctor for more than a decade. The receptionist hesitated when I requested a cognitive evaluation, but she squeezed me into the calendar. As I drove to the clinic, the wheel trembling slightly under my hands, I prayed for clarity. The test was simple: recall sequences, draw shapes, answer questions. I sat straight in the chair, every answer precise, my mind sharp as it had ever been. When it was done, Dr. Ramirez leaned forward with a gentle smile. "Margaret, your memory is excellent. You are as capable as any woman your age, perhaps more so." He printed the report, signed it, and placed it in my hands. I stared at the pages, relief washing through me. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining betrayal. Driving home, I clutched the report like a shield. But even with the proof, I knew Daniel and Claire would dismiss it as easily as they dismissed my words. I needed more, something undeniable. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table pretending to do a crossword, I remembered an old friend from my nursing days who had once hired a private investigator during a family dispute. With shaking fingers, I searched online and found a local agency. The next morning, I met with a man named Mr. Turner in a modest office above a hardware store. His gray suit was worn at the elbows, but his eyes were steady. I told him everything: the camera, the missing files, the gaslighting. His expression never wavered. "You need fresh evidence," he said. "Recordings, signatures, direct admissions. If they're planning to forge documents, we can catch them in the act." He leaned closer. "But you can't confront them too soon. Let them reveal themselves." It felt like planning surgery. Careful, methodical, every step measured. I had been a nurse long enough to know the importance of preparation. Now the patient was my own life. Mr. Turner introduced me to an attorney, Mr. Howard, who specialized in elder abuse cases. Sitting in his office, surrounded by shelves of heavy books, I felt both small and powerful. He reviewed Dr. Ramirez's report, nodding. "This will hold, but we'll need more to secure legal protection. Let them talk. Margaret, when they do, we'll be ready." That night I returned home, my heart beating with a new kind of resolve. Daniel and Claire greeted me at the door with polite smiles. Claire, asking if I'd enjoyed my little outing. I smiled back, hiding the envelope of documents in my handbag. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cornered. In the privacy of my room, I laid out the report, the investigator's card, the lawyer's brochure. They looked like small pieces of paper, but to me they were bricks in a wall I was finally building between myself and their lies. I whispered to myself before turning out the light, "You are not crazy. You are not alone." And for the first time since I had opened that app, I almost believed it. For days I played the role they expected of me, quiet and pliant. I nodded when Daniel reminded me to write things down. I smiled faintly when Claire insisted I rest more. On the surface, I was the picture of a fading mother, but inside I was building something sharp and deliberate. With Mr. Turner's guidance and Mr. Howard's advice, I stitched my own lifeline. A tiny microphone had been sewn into the lining of my cardigan. Another recorder was hidden in the dining room light fixture. I practiced keeping my hands steady, my face neutral, because when the time came, I couldn't afford a single mistake. The invitation arrived in Claire's careful voice. "Let's have a family dinner, Margaret. We'll make everything simple. Just us." I knew what she meant. They were ready to push again. I agreed, hiding my pulse behind a calm nod. That evening the table glowed with candlelight. Claire brought out roasted chicken and potatoes, her smile polished, her eyes sharp. Daniel poured wine and sat down across from me, sliding a stack of documents close enough for me to touch. "Mom," he said softly, "signing these will keep things smooth. You won't have to worry anymore." I picked up the pen, letting it wobble between my fingers. "And if I don't?" My voice cracked like old wood. Claire's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we'll handle it another way. No need for you to be burdened. Sometimes courts don't wait for consent." Daniel glanced at her, then muttered, "We can forge it if we have to." I swallowed, feigning confusion, though my heartbeat was steady now. Every word sank into the recorders above and beneath me. Their trap for me had become mine for them. I pushed the papers back slightly and whispered, "I'll think about it." They exchanged a look of frustration, but I knew. I had what I needed. The mask of frailty had worked. Later, alone in my room, I pressed my hand over the cardigan where the microphone rested. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something solid under my feet. The truth was mine again, and soon it would be theirs to face. The dining room had never felt so small. The air was heavy with the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary, but underneath it lingered the metallic taste of fear. The papers Daniel had placed in front of me gleamed in the candlelight, the pen resting on top like a dare. My cardigan felt warm against my skin, the tiny microphone sewn inside, humming like a secret heartbeat. Daniel leaned forward, his voice smooth but tight around the edges. "Mom, it's for the best. Just sign these papers. You won't have to think about the house anymore. We'll take care of everything." I let my hand hover above the pen, my fingers trembling as though weakened by age and doubt. "And if I don't?" I asked softly, letting my voice crack. Claire's eyes sharpened, though her smile stayed in place. "Then we'll find another way. Courts don't wait forever. Margaret, better if you cooperate. You don't want things to get messy." Her tone was a knife cloaked in velvet. I feigned confusion, blinking at the documents, giving them the illusion of control. Inside, my chest burned with resolve. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll do what we have to. If you won't sign, the deed can be forged. Once you're in a care facility, nobody will question it." His words dropped into the silence like stones breaking glass. My pulse steadied. That was it. The confession, spoken plain and undeniable. I lowered the pen and folded my hands, watching them as though unsure. Every word was captured, preserved, waiting. Then came the sound I'd been holding my breath for. Footsteps, measured and firm, approaching from the hallway. The door swung open. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by Mr. Turner. Authority filled the room like a cold wind. Daniel Hale. Claire Hale, the officer said, voice steady. You're under investigation for attempted fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse. The blood drained from Daniel's face. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, "This is insane! She doesn't know what she's saying." Claire slammed her palm against the table. "She's confused. She's been slipping for months. Ask anyone. This is all a mistake." But the detective lifted the device in his hand and pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, calm and unmistakable. "We'll do what we have to. The deed can be forged." The sound was devastating. Daniel sank back into his chair, his shoulders folding inward, his mouth opening, but no words forming. Claire's eyes darted wildly, looking for an escape that wasn't there. I sat perfectly still, my palms pressed to the wood of the table. My heart ached, but not from confusion anymore. This was grief sharpened into clarity. Daniel's eyes found mine. "Mom," he whispered, desperate. "Please." I shook my head slowly. "You chose this, not me." The handcuffs clicked, sharp and final. As the officers led them out, I remained seated, watching without flinching. The son I had carried in my arms now stared back at me as a stranger, his gaze filled with something I no longer recognized. And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. The days that followed moved both quickly and unbearably slow. Mr. Howard filed the motions. The court issued a restraining order. Daniel and Claire took a plea deal, lighter sentencing in exchange for forfeiting all claims to my property and mandatory counseling. My attorney told me it was a sound resolution, that it spared me a drawn-out trial. Neighbors arrived with casseroles, their voices hushed with sympathy. They asked if I was all right, if I needed company. I smiled, accepted their kindness, but when the door shut, the silence returned, thick and lonely. Blood ties had fractured, and the echo of that fracture followed me from room to room. Yet I was not without support. Dr. Ramirez called to check on me. Mr. Turner stopped by once more, leaving his card on the counter with a small nod. Even the clerk at the grocery store asked how I was holding up. Her words carrying an unexpected warmth. I began to realize that family, in its truest form, often came from the people who chose to stand beside you, not those born to you. One evening I walked through my home slowly, touching the walls, the photographs, the trinkets I had gathered through decades of work. Each item felt heavier now, not with sorrow, but with the stubborn weight of survival. The house was still mine. More importantly, so was my dignity. Now, when I sit on the porch at dusk, I let the quiet wash over me. It no longer feels suffocating. It feels like exhale, like relief. The betrayal lingers. I don't pretend it doesn't, but it no longer defines me. Sometimes I wonder when Daniel lost his way. I think of the child I rocked to sleep, the young man I sent into the world with hope. That son exists only in memory. The man who tried to erase me sits somewhere else now, behind walls of his own making. I grieve for him, but I do not grieve for myself. I am still here. I endured, I find comfort in small gestures. The neighbor who waters my flowers, the grocery clerk who remembers my name, the unexpected kindness of strangers who became allies. My circle is smaller now, but it is honest. If you asked me what I lost, I would say a son. If you asked me what I gained, I would say myself, the cameras, the recordings, the legal papers. They were tools. But what saved me was refusing to surrender my truth. This house, this life, my voice, they remain mine. And that is how the story ends. Not with silence, not with erasure, but with survival. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.